Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my full review of the Sigma 50mm f1.4 DGDN Art, a standard prime lens designed for full-frame mirrorless cameras and an ideal lens for general purpose use. At the time I made this review, it was available for Sony E and LoCA L mounts, the latter working on Panasonic Lumix S bodies. Fingers crossed Sigma can make Canon RF and Nikon Z versions sooner rather than later. Announced in February 2023 and costing around $850 or pounds, it becomes the fifth dedicated mirrorless lens in Sigma's high-end art series, sandwiched between the existing 20, 24, 35 and 85 models, all sharing the same fast f1.4 aperture. In this review, I'll show you everything the new lens can do. A quick note on Sigma's naming strategy. DGDN means that it's designed specifically for mirrorless cameras. Note that the older 50mm 1.4 DG HSM art was designed for DSLRs. It came out in 2014 and remains on sale at a roughly similar price, and it can be successfully adapted to most mirrorless cameras if desired. But this review is all about the newer DGDN version designed for mirrorless cameras only. In terms of competition, the Sony E mount certainly isn't short of native lenses in the 50mm focal length or thereabouts, available in a huge range from Sony's own budget f1.8 costing around $250 to their premium f1.2 G Master at around $2,000. Sitting roughly in the middle are a pair of f1.4 models, one from Samyang at around $750 and the other a Sony Zeiss collaboration from 2017, which still sells for up to $1,500 but which I'd expect will be updated at some point. And don't forget the satisfyingly compact Zeiss 55 1.8 either, which helped launch the system and still has many fans. In the L mount, there's Panasonic's slightly dimmer 50 1.8 costing around $450 and the high-end f1.4 Pro version at around $2,000. LoCA also has a 50 1.4 for L mount, but at around $6,500 it's not really a contender here. So the Sigma 50 1.4 art slots comfortably between existing budget and premium options for both mounts, hopefully delivering a taste of the high end without breaking the bank. Let's find out if it lives up to its promise, not to mention the excellent reputation of its older sibling for DSLRs. Starting with the physical design, the 50 f1.4 art measures 78mm in diameter, 110mm long and weighs 670 grams, making it smaller and lighter than the old 50 1.4 art lens for DSLRs. In your hands it feels solid and well built, with Sigma claiming dust and splash resistance, including a water and oil repellent coating on the front element and a rubber seal at the mount end. It's styled like other recent Sigma lenses, starting with a manual aperture ring, here from f1.4 to f16 in third stop increments, with an A position for body-based control if preferred. Alongside the aperture ring are a switch for manual focus, a customizable autofocus lock button, and a switch to declick the aperture ring for smooth and silent adjustment. Round the other side of the barrel is another switch to lock the aperture ring at the A position if desired. Occupying roughly the outer half of the barrel is the ribbed manual focusing ring, which, like Sigma's previous DGDN models, feels very smooth in operation and more damped compared to the looser style of Sony's own lenses. There's no right or wrong here, just personal preference. At the end of the barrel is a 72mm filter thread, and Sigma supplies a bayonet petal-shaped hood, as well as a padded carrying case. Let's now check out the autofocus, and I've made all of my tests in this review using the E-mount version of the lens mounted on a Sony a7 IV body. Here in single AFS mode you can see the operation is pretty quick, albeit with an occasional wobble to confirm. Now this is pretty much standard practice for Sigma lenses in AFS mode on Sony bodies, and if you switch to continuous AFC you'll enjoy a boost in confidence thanks to the phase detect system used by Sony in this mode. Now, by avoiding any overshooting, it's faster overall than before. Here's the same test for video, again at f1.4 and filming in 4K 25p. Sony uses AFC for video, so the focus pulls here are smooth and accurate with no overshooting. Single autofocus pulls are easy though, so here's the Sigma and Sony combination with face and eye detection using the full autofocusing area, and again with the lens fully open to f1.4. Here you can not only see how the body drives the lens to keep me sharp at all times, but also the potential for blurring in the background when you're filming pieces to camera. I'll have a stills portrait test later in the video. Next for focus breathing, where I'll manually focus the lens from infinity to the closest distance and back again. As I focus the lens closer, you'll see the effect of breathing where the image becomes more magnified, almost as if I'm using a zoom lens here. Now this isn't a problem if you're shooting stills, but it can become distracting when you're filming video. The effect here is certainly pretty strong when focusing between the extremes from infinity to the very closest and back again, and sadly Sony's compensation on recent bodies won't apply to third-party lenses. That said, when performing more modest focus pulls, such as those in my bottle racking or face tracking tests earlier, the effect is reduced and may not actually be an issue for you. Only you can decide if it's going to be an issue or not. Speaking of compensation, the f1.4 art, like all of Sigma's DGDN lenses, is designed to be used with lens profiles to correct for geometric distortion. If you're using a Sony body, you'll want to set distortion comp to auto, and you'll find that in the lens comp menu, and that's what I've used for all of my optical tests in this review. But just briefly, for the optical enthusiasts out there, I'll show you versions of Bright and Peer with distortion comp toggling between off and auto. As always, the auto option will result in a crop in order to apply the digital correction, the degree of which depends on the lens in question. But here it's pretty mild, and what you're left with in auto mode is only fractionally less than other 50s that I've tested. I certainly wouldn't worry about it. Okay, so now let's angle that view so that details run into the corners, and once again all of my images going forward have distortion comp set to auto, as that's how the lens is designed to be used. Here the Sigma is wide open at f1.4, and as always in this test I've focused on the middle of the image. Taking a closer look at the centre of the frame reveals the lens performing well right out of the gate with crisp details. Closing the aperture to f2 and 2.8 brought a mild boost in contrast here, but I'd certainly be happy using the lens wide open when the subject is in the middle of the frame. But what about the corners? Let's return to the f1.4 image and head out to the extremes, where you'll notice some darkening due to vignetting. Now, this isn't unusual for a large aperture lens, and at least the details are remaining pretty respectable. Gradually closing the aperture lifts the vignette, and it's essentially gone by f2.8 to 5.6, but I'd say the corner sharpness remains just about the same and looks pretty good wide open. Overall though, for landscape views, I'd be aiming to use the lens at around f4 to f5.6 for the best overall results across the entire image. Since I was focused in the middle of the frame, it also indicates the field is fairly flat. Obviously, if your main subject is in the corner though, you'd focus there instead. 50mm lenses are also a popular choice for close-range portraits or smaller group shots, and while they lack the compression and ultimate isolation of longer focal lengths, some photographers, myself included, actually prefer their more engaging perspective, while a fast f1.4 aperture can still deliver significant blurring in the background. You've already seen the 51.4R in action for video earlier, so here it is for a stills portrait, where it's clear the degree of blurring you can achieve at f1.4, even when the background's only a few meters distant. Zooming in for a closer look reveals crisp details on my face within the very shallow depth of field, with a rapid fall off to blurring on either side of it. Meanwhile, the rendering in the background looks smooth without any distracting busyness. Of course, at 50mm 1.4, from a typical portrait distance, the subject's nose and ears will fall out of the depth of field and become a little blurred. So here's how the same portrait looks with the aperture closed 2 stops to f2.8. And now closed 1 more stop to f4, where the greater depth of field has rendered more of my head in focus. And while more of the background is now discernible, I would say that the rendering is remaining well behaved here. What do you think? For a closer look at the potential for bokeh and rendering, here's my ornament test, where I position the lens near to its minimum focusing distance. You're looking at the lens with its aperture fully open to f1.4 here, where the fairy lights are transformed into large bokeh blobs with fairly soft edges and only the slightest hint of textures within if you're looking really closely. Like most large aperture lenses, the blobs become elongated rugby ball shapes towards the corners, but become more circular as the aperture is closed, here 1 stop at a time. As I progress through the aperture range, the impact of the 11-bladed diaphragm system can be seen a little bit in the shape of the blobs, but I'd say it's fairly subtle here with no obvious hard angles. More importantly, as the aperture is closed and more of the fireplace becomes visible, I'd say the Sigma lens is rendering the view very nicely, certainly up to f8. If you're looking for bokeh blobs at more of a portrait distance, the Sigma has you covered. Here's another face tracking video, but this time indoors with the lights behind me rendered into attractive blobs. This is going to be a really nice lens for presenting pieces to camera from a tripod, as well as for traditional portrait photography. Sigma quotes a closest focusing distance of 45cm for the lens, but I always check the performance at the minimum distance by simply photographing a ruler as close as I can manually focus on it. Here's the result at f1.4 where I could reproduce a subject measuring 192mm across the width of the frame. Taking a closer look at the edges, you'll see the image does become soft with the aperture wide open, at least from this distance, but closing it down to say f8 here has delivered a crisp result across the frame. Just before wrapping up, I wanted to show a couple of shots where I deliberately tried to trigger lateral chromatic aberrations with high contrast subjects against a strongly backlit sky, and also which may fall outside the depth of field. I shot these at f1.4 to show this effect at the maximum aperture. If you look closely enough, you might see a hint of coloured fringing in the toughest areas, but to be honest, it's hardly stood out here and I really was looking for it. Of course, your mileage may vary in all the tests that I've made, but certainly the 51.4 DG DNR isn't a bad offender by any means, even when focused as close as possible. Which now means it's time for my final verdict, during which I'll show you a bunch of photos that I took with the 51.4 DG DNR on the Sony a7 IV, and as always, if you'd like a closer look, you can access some of the original images via my review page for this lens at cameralabs.com. In a market flooded with standard lenses, the Sigma 50mm 1.4 DG DNR makes a compelling case for itself, delivering excellent quality across the frame, attractive rendering and fast focusing, all in a solid, weather-sealed barrel at a reasonable price. Owners of Sony and Panasonic mirrorless bodies should be very happy. Crucially, it also slots comfortably between existing options, providing a taste of the high-end without breaking the bank. Sure, Sony's 1.2 G Master and Panasonic's 1.4 Pro may slightly outperform it in some respects, and in the case of the Sony, boast a slightly brighter aperture too, but Sigma's now made it much harder to justify spending over double on either of these lenses. Meanwhile, if you're coming from the other end of the market, the Sigma will deliver a step up in sharpness and especially rendering over budget models, although it does feel almost churlish to complain too much about lenses costing as little as $200. These entry-level models are also not only more affordable, but smaller and lighter too, making them more attractive than models like the Sigma, particularly when paired with more compact bodies. Sony owners also still have the option of the old Zeiss 55 1.8, which costs a tad more and boasts excellent sharpness, albeit, at least in my opinion, not the most attractive rendering in a surprisingly compact barrel. As I said at the start, there's certainly no shortage of options around this focal length, but I'd personally now go for the Sigma over the 55 Zeiss, unless size was a critical decider. Also, do keep an eye on the prices of the original 51.4 ART for DSLRs, as bargains may be had, especially in the used market. Ultimately, with most 50mm lenses either targeting budget or premium buyers, the Sigma 51.4 DG DNR becomes a welcome mid-range alternative at a price point with relatively few direct rivals. We've waited a surprisingly long time for the native mirrorless successor to Sigma's classic for DSLRs, but it's finally here and it doesn't disappoint. So is this the lens you've been waiting for, or does the perfect 50 still elude you? Let me know in the comments, and if you found any of my reviews useful, please do consider giving this video a like and my channel a follow. It really does help. And if I've helped you make a decision on a pricey bit of kit, don't forget you could always treat me to a cup of coffee, or treat yourself to a Camera Labs t-shirt, or perhaps a copy of my in-camera photography book. There's links to everything, including the latest pricing for the lens, in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.